3, 2, 1. Okay, welcome to our 5 interview of the project Normal Life Inspirational Stories Women of Today. So, Juntos is the youth section of the RISC-RISE consortium, which is all about bringing people together and creating a worldwide dialogue. In our project, Normal Life Inspirational Stories Women of Today, we create a platform for amazing women to share their story and the youth of today to be inspired.
And it is my honor to present our very special guest, Mrs. Bandana Rana. So thank you for being with us. And she is a very special person because she has worked to promote women's rights and gender equality at the grassroots, national, regional, and global levels over the past 3 decades. She worked as an editor and anchor for Nepal television for 20 years before founding, sorry for the mispronunciation, Sanchavika Samuha, Forum of Women in Media, and became its first president. In 2010-2011, Mrs. Rana collaborated with Nepal's Ministry of Peace and Reconstruction to implement United Nations initiatives on women, peace, and security. She's one of the founders and current executive chair of Saathi, a pioneering Nepalese NGO dedicated to ending violence against women and girls. She also currently heads the Global Network of Women for Peace and Security, and she is a member of the boards of international and regional initiatives on women, peace, and security. Mrs. Rana is also serving her second term in the UN CEDAW committee. So it is an honor to have you here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to the youth, and I'm humbled with your introduction. Just to clarify that I am one of the founder of Saathi, but past president of Saathi, but I continue to provide strategic direction to Saathi. So I'm continued to affiliate with it. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. So I will start with the background question. So where are you from and where do you live now?
I am from Nepal. I was born in Nepal and I have always lived in Nepal. I have traveled, but I have always been based in Nepal. I come from the capital city called Kathmandu, but I live there. I live there with my family. And as I said, I have always lived in Nepal, always been based in Nepal.
Okay. And how old are you?
Which is a small country in Asia between India and China.
Okay, perfect. So the second question is, how old are you?
Oh, wow. Do you also ask age? I have just turned 60. So it's my diamond age. I have just turned 60. It's my diamond age. And I'm very proud and gracefully growing old.
What a nice way to put it. But also, if you could tell us a bit about your job and what it is you do now, and also over the past 30 years of your career.
Well, as you have already mentioned, I started my career with the national television when it started in Nepal. Television started late in Nepal. That was 1986. That was the first television that came to Nepal. So I worked for television initially as a full-timer, as a newscaster, news editor, reporter, producer. But later, because my advocacy was brewing inside me, and I did feel the need for working for women's voices, being women's voices, and I need to expand my horizon. So I left my full-time job in television, but continued my part-time. That is how I served 20 years in Nepal television. So since I was then, after 5-6 years, I was doing part-time in television, I had ample time, to work for women's rights. I did have a brief stint with UNDP in Nepal for 2 years in the early 1990s. But working for UNDP taught me a lot of things, in terms of UN processes, UN procedures, UN languages, how to be politically correct. But I was not very happy working full-time for the UN because I felt there was a lot of writing to be done and I wasn't touching people's lives. I wasn't seeing people's lives. I wasn't seeing the change visibly. So I needed to work with human, and see the change, try to touch people's lives. So that's when I decided that I wouldn't continue my work, my job at UNDP, and I left the job. And as you have already mentioned, since then, this was in 1992, we founded this organization, Sathi, because my experience had taught me, my experience in television had also taught me, because our society was a patriarchal society, the need for bringing in women's experiences and voices to the policy table. Also, when I was working for UNDP, I had the opportunity to compile human development voices and interviews for a global documentary on on UNDP's first human development report. So I traveled to many rural areas of Nepal trying to collect voices of diverse people. It was very easy to interview men because they were always ready to talk and very keen to talk. But whenever I placed my mic in front of a woman, there would be four men around her saying, "Oh, she doesn't know anything. She's too shy. She can't speak. It's a waste of time. Don't bother to interview her. She will not be able to say anything or share anything." And I was very disturbed with that, but I was determined to have women's voices as well. So I started to explore when I could meet the women alone. So that was at 4 a.m. in the morning, when they went to fetch water away from their home in a common tap. And that's where I found their voices, their quarrels, their chirpings, their singing, and I befriended them and finally was able to take their interviews. But for them, what mattered most was, I told them what troubled them most. And the thing that troubled them most was domestic violence. Some of them sexual violence, physical battering, some alcohol abuse, drug abuse by their male partners, husbands, and dowry. Dowry is a bride price that you have to pay when you get married to the husband's side. So not bringing in enough dowry was another reason. So, and sometimes even a simple reason like the food not having enough salt or not being good enough they would end up being physically battered by their husbands. So that was what was troubled them most, and they said, we are never happy. We can only be happy if this kind of violence is eliminated completely. So that's what motivated, and propelled me to work on domestic violence. And at that time, domestic violence was a very private affair. No one talked about it. It was a secret topic. It was a private affair between a husband and a wife, and the others should not be talking about it. So it was difficult for us. But in 1992, we could driven with this experience, and my other friends who had also faced similar kind of experiences. We 8 of us founded Sathi in 1992. The Sathi means friend in Nepali. And our primary objective was to address domestic violence against women. We faced a lot of discouragement. Everyone saying, "Are you mad? How can you work on domestic violence? It's such a private affair. This is not an issue to be worked on." But we were determined. And since then, there has been no looking back. From Sathi, through Sathi, we have founded shelters. We have worked with survivors. We have advocated for policy changes, for legislations. It took us, we advocated for 14 years for the domestic violence law, because we realized that without the law, our hands were tied. We could not provide any legal assistance to the women. So we advocated for a domestic violence law, and I'm happy to say that in 2009, Nepal adopted the law. There are many, many experiences that we have had, but that's how I started my work. And my second organization that I founded, co-founded, let's say, was because my experience was as a media personality. I had experience in journalism. And in 1995, I attended the Fourth World Women's Conference, the UN Fourth World Women's Conference in Beijing, which is normally known as the Beijing Conference. And that was my first big overseas visit, in 1995. I mean, I had traveled to to a few countries before, but that was my biggest conference that I had attended. There were 30,000 civil society organizations, 30,000 representatives in Beijing. So I was in awe with the movement, with the crowd that was there, and with everyone advocating and shouting and discussing, sharing their experiences on women's rights. And at the end of the conference, there were 12 critical issues that were adopted. Out of the 12 critical issues, one was women in media. And then I realized the power of women working in the media and how you can change things, the power of media itself also, and how you can change the mindset, how you can pressure governments for policy changes through the media. So the media played a very important and powerful role. So with that realization, when I returned, I had several discussions with a number of, there were very few women working in the media at that time, but we had our interactions. And finally, we were able to institutionalize a women's media forum called Sancharika Samuha in Nepali, which is called the Women's Communicators Forum. So I along with our friends, co-founded it, and I led that organization as the first elected president for a number of years. So a big chunk of my experience has gone into media advocacy, also through this forum. So this is how I started my career. I've never had a salaried employed job since then. Since I left UNDP a long time ago, it has been more independent, serving through non-governmental organizations.
Wow, so impressive. And so also you're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your family.
Oh, well, I was married very early. I was married at 17, so which is illegal now. And I was a mother at 18. My first daughter, I have two daughters. My first daughter was born when I was 18 years old. So I was actually not a very informed mother, as they say. I was not, I didn't have all the informed, the information that a young mother a young mother requires for preparing for a delivery. What I was told is, I was only told, all my elders said, whenever they looked at me, I used to be very thin. So when you are pregnant, you put on a little bit of weight, and maybe I looked more better than what I looked as a skinny girl, So everyone would say, "Oh, you look so beautiful. You'll get a son. You'll get a son." Everyone wished me, my elders. Everyone said, whenever we went to visit them, everyone would say that, "Oh, you look beautiful. You look bright," which means you'll get a son. And I was actually happy, saying, I was so under the impression that I will get a son, because all the elders were so experienced. I thought knew. I was a child, thought knew that they would knew about it. That is why they said it. Little did I realize that no one says you get a daughter. You'll get a daughter, because daughter's birth is not seen positively. Daughters are a huge burden. So no one told anyone that you will get a daughter. It was just a formality that you'll get a son. Everyone says, "Oh, bless you, may you get a son." No one says, "May you get a daughter." So my young mind didn't realize that, and I thought they knew well. So I was all prepared to get a son. That's what I thought. But I was unprepared for a daughter. And because I was so unprepared, I think a young mind, and mind you, my husband is the only son in the family. I mean, my husband has a sibling who is a younger sister, but is the only son. And usually a son is said to be required to carry on the family lineage as well, So when I got a daughter, I was extremely disappointed. It was this young mind. So I was extremely disappointed, and I think I went through. It was the post-delivery as well as the disappointment of getting a daughter that led me into a kind of a post-delivery depression for some days. Of course, I came out of it. It wasn't very severe, but there was depression for some days, and it took me some time. I had read a few books where the books only tell you how, as soon as you get your get a child, the mother and child bonding is so strong. But I was so young that even breastfeeding was difficult for me. I wasn't so I was a very private person, and I did not like elders coming and touching my breast, touching my body, telling me do this, telling me do that, how you do it. So I was extremely uncomfortable for the first initial months. uh, but of course the bonding was extremely, it was growing. I myself was a child, it was growing. And I the lesson that I learned from that is that you can't, there are many young brides in Nepal, very young child mothers as well. I mean, it's not as bad as it was used to be during my time, but it continues to. We still have child marriage, one of the country that has the highest percentage of child marriage still. So I thought that's one area where we have to prepare. You cannot go into motherhood without preparation and without adequate information. It harms the child as well as the mother. But to cut the story short, after 4 years, I was pregnant again. And this time I was all prepared. I had read everything and I knew how, no one can determine, whether you have a daughter or a son. And I was prepared to have a healthy second child, whether it was a daughter or a son. And my second child was a daughter again. I was happy. She was a nice, beautiful child. Both my daughters are extremely beautiful. But I wanted to share the experience of my first delivery to give this idea. It's not to say that my daughter is not beautiful. I love her. Like both my daughters are very, very dear to me. They are very great human beings. But to give an experience of how, if you are not informed, if you are not prepared, how it actually harms the entire process. But as I said, 4 years later, I was all prepared to be a mother and have a healthy child. And I was very happy to have my second daughter. So I'm very happy. I have two daughters. The family pressure was there. The family, not my internal immediate family members, not even my husband or my immediate family members, but the rest of the families was, no, oh, okay, now you need to get a third child. When are you getting a son? I mean, your husband is the only son, so you need to get a son. But I was determined that I would not get more than two children. So my two daughters are beautiful. They are successful mothers themselves now. They're married, yeah, and I'm happy with them. So just a little about my family. That's how it is. So I continue to live in my house in Kathmandu with my husband, my mother-in-law, and my sister-in-law who's unmarried. Uh, and it's a unique family, and my mother. So I have two mothers living with me, you see, because my mother, after my father passed away around 8 years ago, she was all alone, and she was past 80. So I decided to ask her to come and stay with me. It bothered me that she was staying alone. In the beginning, she was very hesitant. She didn't want to come because in our culture, mothers don't live in daughters' houses. So she didn't want to, but I somehow convinced her to come, and she's happy now. So it's a unique family. I have two mothers living with me, my mother and my mother-in-law, my husband, of course, and my sister-in-law. My two daughters are married. I am very lucky. People tell you that you need to get sons because the sons look after you in your old age, but the daughters marry and go away to their husband's house. So you will be all alone when you are old. One is that, and one is the sons perform all the rituals that opens the passage to heaven. That is what is the belief. So that's why you need to get a son. Now I see so many families who have sons, but their sons have migrated to foreign countries. Sometimes they are not even able to come back when their parents are ailing, or even when their parents die, because they do not have papers and they are waiting for their papers. Either it is US or Canada or wherever it is. And I feel I'm fortunate that I have two daughters, and that was one of the reason my immediate family members would push me to get a son. But my two daughters are within 15 minutes of drive, living, not even 15, sometimes 10 minutes. They live in Nepal. They have not migrated overseas. They live in Nepal. They are immediately available. I meet them almost every day, and they are there whenever I need them. So it's a beautiful relationship, that I have with my daughters and my family. Yeah.
That is so beautiful. So now a more personal questions. The first one is, did working in a male-dominated industry affect your work ethic or ambition as an activist?
Oh, that's a continued journey. As I said, when I worked in Nepal television, there were very few women who worked there. So of course it was a male dominated. I call it a mainstream media, not a mainstream, MALE, mainstream media, So actually my first advocacy grew from there because I realized that women's issues never got priority in the newsroom. Women's issues were always sidelined, like, oh, this is not important. But initially, I did not realize that because initially, I also came from a patriarchal, society. So my learning was as I grew, though my family were quite liberal. We were a middle class family. I'm the eldest of four siblings. I have a younger sister and two younger brothers. And when I grew up, my mother, she had admitted us to the only missionary English school in Nepal. So I'm glad about that. But as I grew up, not that I faced extreme discrimination, but however, the understanding was that the male is the head of a family. The male are the people who become leaders and who have to get good jobs. The female is mostly, like we have special celebrations, festivals, like your Christmas. We call it Dasai. That's like our Christmas. And during that time, you get blessings from your elders. And whenever your elders blessed you, they would, for my brothers, for the male boys, they would say, oh, may you be a big man, may you study much and earn much, be a leader. That's the kind of blessings the boys got as I was growing up. And the blessings that we women, girls would get was, may you grow up beautiful and get a good husband. That's the kind of blessings we got. We never got like, oh, may you be a big leader, a successful professional. That's not the kind of blessings we got. So coming from that background, and sometimes the only discrimination initially I would feel is, no one, young people don't like to get up early, right? And you like to sleep late. So for us, the deadline was 7 a.m. So when the clock was 7 a.m., my mother would say, come on, it's 7 a.m. already, and you girls are still sleeping. You have to go to your husband's house. What will they say? And my brother would be soundly sleeping. So that's the only thing that troubled me when I was growing up. That why is it that my brother can sleep beyond 7 a.m. and that I have to get up at 7 a.m. So that troubled me. So didn't there were few things, but because I grew up in that culture, and my another culture, the real discrimination that I really felt was when I had my first menstruation. So I was unprepared, like Nepali culture, you really don't have much. My mother, she's a very strong, powerful woman, and she's an inspiration to me throughout my life, but she has never been to a school. She can read and write, but she's never been to a school. She's not educated, and she was determined that we get education and, admitted us to school. But in a Nepali culture, you don't have that kind of an open communication. So I was unprepared for my first menstruation. I really didn't know what menstruation is at all. And being the eldest, if I had not been the eldest, probably I would have learned from my elder sisters. But being the eldest, I didn't know anything about it. So for me, when I had my first menstruation, we have a culture. My mother hurriedly came to me and she said, you've had a menstruation. It's called nachune in Nepali. And nachune means untouchable. So during this period, you are untouchable. And for your first menstruation, you need to be confined to a dark room. All the curtains were drawn, dark room for 21 days. And the reason that was given to my young mind was, during this period, you are impure, you are untouchable, whereas the spirit, the men and the sun, they are powerful beings. Also the sun and the men are powerful beings. So your shadow should not even be cast on them. So that's the reason for drawing the curtains. You cannot see the sun and you cannot see any men. And I had to stay separately, sleep separately, on a floor. And whereas I was used to eating and playing with my brothers and my father, and suddenly I was told I'm not allowed to do that. And no one would touch me. They would bring my food in a plate. I had to eat it and wash it myself and dry it in one corner of the room. And when it was dry, they would take it away and bring the food. So I think since I was so unprepared for this, that that confinement actually robbed my confidence. And I think I was filled with inferiority complex, that I am not the same as my brothers, and my fathers, that they are more superior to us. So when I came out of the confinement, I think it was more a timid girl, who lack of confidence, filled with inferiority, and without the confidence to interact very on a par with men. It was very difficult. I wasn't the same. I became more shy and more timid, and the complex was there. So that's how I grew up. That's how I grew up. So yes, definitely. When it's amazing that how I entered television, because it's a mainstream media. Now, coming from that background, I did find a lot of initially. So initially, I did not find any discrimination. Because I was still that submissive, very obedient girl. Like people would tell you what to do, and I would do it very diligently. And even if they give you a pat on the back, excellent work, I would be very happy, contented with what I was told to do, and I would do. Rather than exploring my own mind or my own critical assessment, just doing what you were told to do, and I was happy. Everyone liked me. Everyone loved me. But my first overseas visit was in Netherlands. I got an opportunity through Nepal Television to attend a news and current affairs post-diploma course in Netherlands. And that also because the Netherlands government says there was a scholarship for 2 people from television. And the Netherlands government said one has to be a woman. There was a mandatory condition. So that's the reason that I was considered capable enough, qualified enough to attend that course. And it was very difficult, but for me, I was hesitant. I didn't want to go in the early stage because I had to leave my 2 young children and go away for almost 6 months, So that was a very, very difficult choice for me. But my family were very supportive, and my senior officers really said I should go. And with a very difficult and a heavy heart, I actually went overseas. But when I went, I gave my full heart. I really worked hard. But my initial shock was, and that's when I learned, because the teachers would, how it is in the European countries and American countries, they ask you to call you Joe, John, which is not our culture. We call every man sir, like who work with you, your colleagues, your officers. So when they asked you to call them with their first names, that was a culture shock for me. Here were gray-haired men, so senior to me, professors, telling me to ask them by their first names. I just couldn't do that. That was one. The other was they would present a theory and ask us. There were very few students, not even 10, I think not more than 10. And they were from all overseas, international students. And perhaps they found me quite peculiar, coming from an Asian country, a very shy, timid girl. So they would pick me up all the time, and they would say, Bandana, what is your opinion on this? And for me, that was so strange, because I was so used to memorizing what the teachers taught and writing that, but never being asked what my personal opinion was. And that was extremely difficult for me. I could hardly respond to them. But then I got used to it, and very timidly, demurely, I started thinking, and I realized to give my opinion, I need to think critically. So I started thinking and started giving very hesitantly because they would consistently pick on me. I started giving my opinion with a lot of fear. And then I realized, and they would say, excellent, that's a good idea. Maybe we could do it that way. And I was so shocked because I thought my opinion had mattered. My opinion was respected by people who were male and who were elder to me. Now that was a culture shock for me as well, you know. So I think I must have been around 25 at that time. So I feel that it was in Netherlands that I discovered myself, my own identity, that I have a mind of my own, that I can have a different opinion from other male colleagues and seniors and still be respected, you know. So it taught me to think for myself. And then I realized also that there may be so many women who never realize their potential, who never realize what they could have done, you know, and die, and that's a loss to the family and to the nation. And that was one time where I felt perhaps I need to work on this more. So when I came back, it was then that I started realizing the discrimination, you know, because before that, in television, before that, I would just do the work that I was told to do. But now I started giving my voice. I started expressing my opinion. I started saying how things could be done differently. And then the conflict started. You know, no one wanted this bossy, opinionated young girl telling you what to do. So that is when I felt I was really harassed, and to an extent that I felt I need to leave my full-time job. You know, it was very difficult for me to take it. It wasn't a supportive environment. So that is why after 6 years of full time employment in Nepal television, I left the full time. I actually wanted to leave, but because, you know, but because I was a newscaster, I appeared on a public television, and there were very few. That was the only channel, mind you, at that time in Nepal, and there was no competition. And there were very few women news readers in English news desk, particularly in English news desk, that I would be doing. So the public demanded that I return. I took a leave. I said I'm leaving for 2 months, but there was so much of public curiosity, inquiry as to why Bandana is not appearing on screen. So that is one of the reasons that the administrators called me back and said, please continue on part-time as well, you know. So I continued my part-time contract and worked for Nepal Television as a newscaster, news reader, editor for 20 years. And because I worked part-time, it gave me time to do my other advocacy work, you know, in founding the organizations that I talked to you about. Oh my, this was a long one. Okay.
How impressive, but it's worth it. It's okay, we're good for time still, so you enjoy. And our next question is, well, you mentioned already your organizations, and it is, what do your women's shelters do, and what services do you offer?
Well, as I said, when we opened Sati in 1992, forget shelters, people didn't even talk about domestic violence. So we started raising awareness on domestic violence. And little did we realize that when people came to your doors saying, okay, you know, now I know that, you know, it's my right to speak up against domestic violence. I'm living in a violent relationship. Where do I go now if I want to leave? And we had no support services, no laws, you know. So we realized that raising awareness alone is not enough. You need to have complementary laws and services. You know, where do we tell a woman who says, I'm in an abusive relationship, my husband almost killed me last night, where do I go? I was a known person because I worked in television, and they would know my phone numbers, they would know where I lived. Sometimes there were women on my doorsteps, you know, saying, where do I go? And we all of us, 8 of us who founded Sati, realized that we need to have support services. We cannot raise awareness alone. So it was difficult. You know, we went through a lot of difficulties and challenges, but in 1995, we were successful to open the first women's shelter in Nepal. We were excited because it was the Global Fund for Women, which is based in US, gave us the initial funding for this women's shelter for 1 year. And we were excited, you know. we managed to open this shelter, we needed to take some training ourselves. We invited an expert from India and took a training ourselves on counseling, and how to befriend women survivors. But little did we realize that after a year, women shelters are not a project. You cannot say like, oh, I have a research project, I'm writing, and the research is over and the project is over. But for women shelters, you have women in your shelters who need support continuously, beyond the 1 year that we had funding for. So after a year, we realized we don't have funding and we cannot throw the women on the streets. This is a continued support that we require. So it has been challenging. It has always been challenging finding resources and funding, continued resources and funding for women's shelters. But I'm happy to say that we have 4 women's shelters now. One is in the Kathmandu, the capital city, but the 3 others are in the districts, in the Midwestern and Far Western region. And in our 30 years of founding Sati, we have never turned down, we have never stopped our services, and we have never turned down anyone except if they don't meet the criteria, because sometimes we do not take in, and it's unfortunate, we do not take in women with problems of mental health. And the reason for that is because we do not have the resources and the equipment and the infrastructure and the technicians needed to address that. And that will affect them. We are not able to provide them the needed services, and that will affect the others as well. So that is one of the reasons. It's unfortunate. I still say that we need a separate shelter. And there are some, 1 or 2 now, which cater to women who are suffering from mental health, But otherwise, we have continued our services. Like I said, it's not easy. It's very challenging. Initially, it was totally, we had to look for funds, and sometimes it's spending nights trying to say, now, how do I get the funding for next year for this shelter or for that shelter? So, but lately, only partially, we have tried to seek government funding. So partially for 1 or 2 two of our shelters, there's partial funding. It's not adequate funding, partial funding from the government. We continue to advocate that this is government's accountability and that the government should be able to fund this fully. But as you know, Nepal is a small developing country with a lot of priorities, and it will take some time for the government to take responsibility and accountability of funding shelters completely. But we continue to advocate. The kind of people that come to our shelters are domestic violence survivors, of course, sometimes physically battered women, victims of sexual violence. There's a lot of rape victims as well. Sometimes the age of the rape victims that come to our shelters as young as 30 as well. We have migrant women who have been physically abused, who have returned to Nepal and come to us. We have acid victims, like their partners have thrown acid at them and burnt them. We have acid victims as well. We have victims who have been thrown out of their houses without any economic and financial support to them. So these are the kinds of survivors that we keep in our shelters. We have a standard operating procedure, of course. You do need, when you run a shelter, you do need to have rules and regulations. Our SOP says that we can keep we can keep a person only for 6 months, but sometimes we have broken our rules and kept survivors for beyond 6 months. But during the 6 months, we try to, of course, we do our counseling, whatever medical needs they require, but we try to reintegrate them after 6 years, either into their own society, that if they want, in their family, in the society. And so we do provide, where needed, very small seed fundings for them to for their own livelihood, like to open a shop or something. And we continue to follow up for the next 2 years with them. So this is how we run our shelters.
Wow, I mean, that's impressive work. It's truly inspiring. And so for our next question is, how do you still have faith in humanity after what you have seen and experienced? And adding to that is, what advice would you have for young people? I mean, based, as you say, you answer from experience, to the next generation of what they can do to help solve these issues and what we can do too from a distance.
Well, humanity, I think, is something which needs to be inbuilt in you. I have worked with survivors, and many people said, "Oh, how depressing it must be for you." That's how they say, because you listen to stories which of pain, of trauma, of survival. So it must be very depressing for you. But for me, I think my humanity also comes from the fact that I have dealt with so many survivors and have seen their pain, their trauma, but also their power and resilience, and how they transform their pain into power, their resilience. And that has taught me, the humanity in me, I think, has been enhanced, because I feel that when women like them can go through so much pain and trauma and still collect themselves and be so powerful, the little that I can do is I mean, I feel I'm so fortunate that and I feel much better, than being depressed. And I think that is what enhances my humanity, so my work, through my work, I feel for personally, for me, that is what has built my humanity, my touching lives for people, trying to make a difference, trying to be to spread positivity, so that we care for each other, that we disseminate love. That's how we gain love, that's and loving yourself. Unless and until you love yourself, you cannot love others. So that's how I do it. But humanity as a whole, I do feel, I do feel there are sometimes I do fear about the younger generation, at times, that perhaps, you need persistency, you need consistency. And I have learned a lot from my elders, and I respect my elders. I feel that you need to respect your culture and your tradition, but not the culture and tradition that discriminates you. You have to be able to speak about it as well. I don't feel that any religious manuscript or culture or tradition speaks about discrimination between human beings, So you should have the strength to talk against any religious manuscript that has been misinterpreted by the patriarchal mindset, that women should be discriminated against. And I'm talking about harmful traditional practices, like I talked to you about our menstruation practices. I was confined in a room in my house, dark room, but there are women in our rural areas who are confined in a cow shed out of the house, in a very narrow, small cow shed, and they run the risk of being killed by wild animals, being sexually violated by people, perpetrators. So it's worse. So not only that, there are many child marriage, harmful traditional practices. So I think these are things no religious manuscript, no culture should follow. So you should be able to be bold enough to speak against it. But when I see at certain times uh, that this is being carried out, I feel, and what really troubles me most now, I'm jumping from one thing to another, but what troubles me most now is the sexual violence against minors. There are news of an 8-month-old, 1 year old, 3 years old girls being raped. How painful can that be? How painful can that be? So I sometimes feel perplexed at the humanity, you know. So I feel on one hand, we have so much power with the new digital life that we are leading. I'm able to talk to you because of this digital technology. We are in two far apart across the world, but we are able to connect like this. But on the other hand, digital technology is also used to perpetrate violence. So unless and until there is humanity, we cannot even potentially use the power of the things that we are being taught, or things that we have at hand. So that troubles me a little bit. But I do interact a lot with young people, because since 2019, I always did, but 2019, I have a deliberate motto that I will engage as much as possible with young people and try to engage them in my own initiatives also. So during the COVID, I actually hosted a weekly program, intergenerational dialogue, with the youth, sharing experiences on several matters from sexual violence to mental health to a lot of other issues. So that was my contribution in engaging to the youth. And I continue to do that also, though I'm not able to do it weekly now, but I do quite frequently, engaging with the youth. So I feel the youth of today need to understand, they have all the power in their hand. They have all the power, like what we didn't have. You won't believe it, when I read news in television, there were no teleprompter. I had to read from handwritten notes. Sometimes there was so much of scribbling. But now there's so much of technology, so much of power, so much of good education. So, and the young people are so bright and smart. So that bright, smart, intellectual education needs to be channeled in a positive way. You have to be able to touch people's lives positively. And competition is with yourself. Of course, it is with yourself. You need to do your best. You have to be better than what you are today. But sometimes harsh competitions with others make you very, very harsh. I have seen that, and that's what I'm a little worried about. But I feel that with young people like you all who are keen to learn from people like us, and we learn from you. It's like I said, it's an intergenerational learning. I continue to learn from young people. So I think that cross learning and intergenerational learning has to continue, keeping in mind, the humanity in you, by loving everyone, by creating and paving the path for people like you and people younger than you. I think that's what I did. Thank you.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you a lot for this interview. It was so, so beautiful, so inspired to us. So thank you a lot for being with us. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we'll interact again. I wish you all the best for your future.
Thank you very much. Such an honor to have you with us.
Yeah.